The idea for the novel came from reading about the Mark Stone case and from various other undercover police who'd been embedded in activist groups for many years during the 80s and 90s. At the time when all that came out, I was helping to organise at a local social centre near me, and I was sort of on the fringes of some radical activity, and I knew a lot of people who had known Mark Stone and who had met him. The more that I read about it, the more fascinated I became and more horrified by how long some of this undercover infiltration had gone on for. And I thought it was a really important subject to write about, and someone should write a book about it, and that person should be me. Well, yes, I did deliberately fictionalise some of the cases, and I stepped away from the cases that already existed for a couple of reasons. I think that allows you to create a more compelling story, and also because I didn't feel like it was right to use someone's story completely, because the people that this has happened to have already been traumatised enough, and I didn't really want to add to that. So I wanted to create a whole new story that used elements of different cases. One of my big influences is Paul Auster. I really love the way that he writes and the way that he uses fiction to tell a story about how fiction works. My style doesn't really follow that, I wouldn't say, but some of the writers that were a big influence on this book were Ruth Ozeki, who uses elements of real life to tell stories about all sorts of interesting things. And while I was writing it, I was reading a lot of science fiction as well, a lot of Philip K. Dick, and I was really interested in how he creates a compelling story that moves along really quickly and totally involves the reader in a world without explaining too much about how that world works. And the activist world is a world that's quite foreign to many people, I think. And so I wanted my treatment of the activist world to be a bit like how Philip K. Dick wrote his science fiction worlds. I wanted to just immerse the reader straight away without explaining too much. I think what's happening now is even more frightening than what I've written about in the book, because what's happening now is that big organisations have got, the government is spying on their own citizens, if you like, and we're being influenced by all kinds of scary stuff and through social media. As you say, in this post-truth world, it's very, very hard to know what to believe. And I found this when reading about WikiLeaks and all those kinds of things. I was reading about it and all the secrets that have come out, but also thinking, well, what's the motivation behind leaking this? You know, the leaks are probably all stuff that's true, and that's quite scary. What do we believe? I think it's almost too big to comprehend, in a way, the scale of spying and surveillance that's been done to ordinary people, the way that the general public is being manipulated. There's a lot of really good writers in the North, and I think the North and Northern writers have a real great deal of, it's a bit of a cliche to say, but they have a lot of grit and a lot of spirit. I think in the North, it's almost easier to be creative because nobody notices what you're doing. And I feel like it's, people don't always pay attention to Northern publishing, they don't always pay attention to Northern writing. There's so much great writing going on up here. In a way though, the fact that people aren't paying attention to you makes it easier to be creative because you can do whatever you want and you don't worry so much, oh, what are people going to think? Because that's not even a consideration. So I think that's a really healthy thing for a creative person. At the same time, on the other hand, there's all these great writers and all this great writing that's going on that isn't being celebrated. And this is part of why I started the Northern Short Story Festival. There's not always a lot of support for Northern writers, especially, I've noticed in West Yorkshire, there's not a lot of support for writers. Nevertheless, even though that's the case, there's all this great writing that's happening, and we should be celebrating that. And that's why I started the festival, and that's why I'm really glad that Northern Fiction Alliance exists, honestly.